This is your Professor Ian. This is a video lecture about heroines of Greek mythology. So I'm just going to look at some ideas about the heroines that populate Greek mythology briefly. So let's get started. This is just a representation of the six Olympian goddesses, or the important goddesses that are female ones: Athena, Demeter, Artemis, Hestia, Aphrodite, and Persephone, right? The bride of Hades, right? So some of the important female figures. One thing you might notice, Artemis is a warrior, Athena is a warrior too, but they're all the ones that are warriors also have to be kind of virgin warriors, right? So they're more constricted than some of their male counterparts. If you look at Poseidon, Apollo, Zeus, right? These are all big important male figures that are able to go out and spread their lineage and their love around the world in a way that the female figures in the Greek pantheon just aren't allowed to do, right? In order to be these kinds of figures, I guess that's Hera. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Hestia is not represented here. Sorry about that. But in order to play that role, they also have to, be restricted in other ways, right? And we're going to see that with the heroines of Greek mythology as well. We looked at this in the lecture on the heroes of Greek mythology, this kind of heroes checklist coming from Joseph Campbell and other thinkers. This hero's journey, right? Heroines aren't generally allowed this kind of hero's journey. Right? There's only a couple figures that we'll talk about that get close to this, right? But for heroes, we have there's a whole bunch of stories about them, right? There's dozens of stories about Heracles, and they divide that into major and minor stories, right? The 12 laborers are some major stories, but there's all kinds of side stories too, right? Heroines tend to be connected with just a few stories. And these stories tend to revolve around a male hero, right? Them helping a male hero or their role within a male hero's journey. Heroes are always defeating monsters, beasts, right? These avatars of destruction, chaos, and threats to civilization, right? Whereas heroines are often helping to defeat these monstrous beasts, right? They are helpers. They're necessary to establish social order, but they're not the ones who defeat the beast, right? Without the female heroine's help, it would be harder for the hero to win, or maybe even impossible, but it's always generally the hero that battles the monster, right? Heroes are always favored and trained by gods to complete their tasks, right? Heroines tend to be used by gods and heroes to help complete tasks. Then that goes to this idea here: sacrifice and passivity are usually key virtues for the heroines in the story. They're not rewarded for having agency and initiative in the way that the heroes are, right? And that goes to, again, the heroes' violence in battle and individual victory are heightened for them, right? That's again, those cultural values we're talking about. For the male heroes, it's all about taking the initiative, fighting, and having individual victory. For heroines, it's all about helping the male, being passive and sacrificing when necessary, right? So they're not allowed that hero's journey in the same way. And again, we need to think about the social work that's happening with these different stories. So we can divide this into 5 patterns for the Greek heroines, right? And this is going back to a lot of scholars and thinkers about this topic. Wives and mothers, helper maidens, heroes. Notice the asterisk there because it's kind of limited in the way this happens. Bride of death, and then victorious heroines. Okay, so let's go through these quickly. Wives and mothers, these are self-sacrificing helpers of their male counterparts. Pardon me. Glory, that kind of kleos, is only available through the exploits and offsprings of their male counterparts, right? So they're there to help form that dynasty and that continuation and that victory for the male heroes, but without the male, they don't really have a part to play, right? They're just there to help. These women are not really key to the fulfillment of quests. Instead, they're often there to, again, embody these female virtues that were important in Greek culture. A good example is Alces. She was married to a king, and there's a great play by Euripides called the Alcestes, which is, the story of this couple and Heracles coming in um, and helping them. Anyways, he was a good king, known for his hospitality. Admetus. One time he helps Apollo. There's different versions of this, but he helps Apollo, and his reward, Apollo allows Admetus to avoid death if he can find someone to take his place. So if you read the play by Euripides is very funny because a lot of it is him going around trying to convince people to take his place in Hades, right? He tries to convince his parents, and they say, "No, we'd rather stay alive. Sorry, buddy. We gave you life and we gave you all these things. That's about it. That's all we need to give you." But in the play and in the myth, Alcestis, his wife, takes his place, sacrifices herself so that he can continue living and be the good king he is. In the play, Heracles rescues her. In different myths, Persephone sends her back because of her self-sacrifice. But again, she's embodying that self-sacrifice of the wife figure. Let's move on to helper maidens. So these are not necessarily women or mothers or lovers, but these are women who help the hero achieve their quest. Again, they don't play a central role. Their help might be vital, but they're not the ones fighting the monster. And part of that is they often fade after they play that one role, right? They give the hero what he needs to succeed, and they often fade from there, right? And it reinforces that same dynamic, right? They are self-sacrificing. They're there to help, not there to steal the limelight. They're just there to assist. Great example is Adrienne. She was the daughter of King Minos, and she helps Theseus find his way out of the labyrinth. So she is essential to him, achieving his goal in the way that he does. But, afterwards, Theseus abandons her, just leaves her, sails off without her, and Dionysus eventually rescues her. But he abandons her and even takes off with her sister Phaedra, right? But she helps him, and without her, then he wouldn't be able to achieve the goal, his quest in that way. Another example, Medea. She helps Jason defeat the dragon to get the golden fleece, and then takes off with him as his wife and mother of his children. Now she's an interesting case because she doesn't fade so much as become a kind of villain in her own right, and so she makes this interesting transition where she's first kind of embodying these female traits where she's helping the male hero, right? She goes against her family to help Jason defeat the dragon, but then later, he spurns her and she does something terrible, which you'll learn about this week when you're reading about Jason. But she's this interesting kind of figure that does a little bit of both. Then there are female figures that seem to embody the masculine traits of the heroes that we're learning about, right? But they're often used as negative examples, or they have limited runs as these heroes, right? Some of them have physical and martial qualities equal with men, but they're often used as kind of the exception that proves the rule. Like, oh, look at that, she's the one woman who can stand up and sail with men, right? As we'll see with Atalantia. The Amazons are a good example, right? Remember that heroes checklist. They fulfill some of these things, right? The Amazons were the children of Ares, according to most myth, right? They had major battles with some male heroes, so they had these individual battles, but they weren't part of Greek civilization. They were seen as outsiders, right? They lived in this isolated land, far from civilization, far from men, and at the center of the Greek world. And so they're often characterized as outsiders in a lot of myths. Sometimes individual Amazons will make their way into myths as kind of heroic figures, but in general, the Amazons were this kind of other figure used, again, as like the exception that proves the rule. Atalanta is an interesting figure. She was also, this very heroic female figure. There's tons of, well, not tons, but there are a number of myths about her. They're very interesting. In some versions of the Jason myth, she even sails with the Argonauts, so the only woman to sail with the greatest heroes of Greek myth. Then she defeats Achilles' father in a wrestling match. She has she has a number of tales, but eventually she gets reabsorbed into the social order through marriage and childbirth, and from then on she fades from myth. Whereas our male heroes, they'll when they get their wives and families and such, that's when they form their dynasty and return to civilization. So that's something that's missing from Atalanta. Finally, Clytemnestra, interesting figure. She is Agamemnon's wife. She rules Argos while he's away. She even takes a lover, Aegisthus, lives openly with him. When Agamemnon returns, she murders him because he killed their daughter Iphigenia, in most versions of the myth anyways. And so she murders him as revenge, but then she is seen as this evil figure, and her own son kills her, and it's seen as a rightful murder when he kills her, even though she's getting revenge for the murder of her daughter, right? So she's not allowed to get revenge for the murder of her daughter, but her son is allowed to get revenge for the murder of his father, right? So there's this basic kind of like gendered problem there, right? Agamemnon kills Iphigenia. She gets revenge, but that's seen as wrong, and her murder is seen as just, right? So again, these values are being embodied here, right? Women aren't allowed to do the same thing that men are in this society. And she's also, some of the implications here, she's being punished for ruling as a man and taking a lover as a man would. That takes us on to brides of death, right? So again, for women in ancient Greek culture, options were limited. If you didn't get married, you had very limited options, and marriage itself was this very limiting option. So some women in myth die before marriage, right? This is another way for them to achieve some kind of heroic sacrifice, right? And Persephone is maybe the only version that combines this pattern where she's this wife mother figure, but then she also takes on a bit of a god role in a way where she becomes the spouse of Hades and helps rule the underworld, right? But let's look at a couple other ones. Cassandra. So she was brought back by Agamemnon as a slave after the fall of Troy. And according to the myth, Apollo lusted after her, but she spurned Apollo, and so as a curse, he gave her the gift of prophecy. She was one of his prophets, one of his oracles. But he cursed her that no one would believe her prophecies. Everybody thought she was crazy. So everybody treats her as this crazy person. And when, if you read the Agamemnon, there's a great play, the Agamemnon, about this. She's trying to warn everybody, but no one will believe her, right? And Clytemnestra, who I was talking about before, murders her with an axe in the play, right? So she is, instead of being absorbed into the social order, she is killed in this way. Iphigenia, I was talking about before as well, daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Agamemnon sacrifices her so they'll have the wind so they can sail to Troy after he offends a priest of Artemis, right? She willingly sacrifices herself in all versions of the play, right? So a willing sacrifice, willingly lets herself be killed. That takes us to victorious heroines. There's not many, small group of women, and again, they tend to represent the best, or like the social values people found important with women. Nausicaa, we'll meet her in the Odyssey, right? She recognizes the worth of Odysseus when he's washed up on her shores, right? She's the only one that doesn't flee. She's a princess, and she recognizes him as another great person, right? So there's this kind of meeting of minds, and it's devoid of any kind of sexuality. So it's very interesting that she's allowed that moment. Another figure from the Odyssey is Penelope. So it's interesting that two of these figures are found in the Odyssey, maybe a different take on heroism, as we'll talk about. There's also, probably the most famous is Psyche. She has the most elaborate myth attached to her. And I'll let you read about her on your own. But again, she has what we could think of as a hero's journey, right? She, in a way, I mean, it's kind of different. She goes out, and she does go to the underworld. She has a quest. She has to achieve certain things, not so much through battle and violence, but through her own character and ingenuity, right? But she does have this, what we could call a hero's journey, in a way that I don't think any other female figure in Greek mythology does. So she's probably the closest we have to the big four that we're reading about also this week: Jason, Perseus, Theseus, and Heracles. She's probably the most, has the most in common with those stories. Anyways, I'll post these slides. You can read through them in more detail if you wish. Thank you very much.